Welcome in, everybody, to Fantasy Pros. This is the Fantasy Football Podcast. It is me, Joey P. Joe Pizzapia. With me today are two of the best minds in the fantasy football industry, and Matthew Friedman is also here on the program today. He found his way into the studio somehow, and today it's about the high-risk draft picks in the NFL, the players that might be worth risking it all, and some of the players that could undo all of the work that you've been slaving over for weeks and weeks leading up to your draft. We're going to tell you about those players, why they're risky, whether or not you want to invest in them or not. And I can't think of a better guest today for this program, because this is an important one, than the one, the only, the late round QB himself, Mr. JJ Zachariason. JJ, you are living the stream, as they say nowadays. I know you've launched your own brand. You've got your draft guide out. You've got the podcast. You've got the website. I heard there's a fragrance coming down the pike. I can't wait. I'm very excited to have you on the show today.
Yeah, I'm going to have an apparel line. I'll sell as many articles of dad clothing as possible. That's coming soon. But yeah, it's exciting, man. I love everything I've been doing. It's just a lot of fun, connecting with listeners and consumers and such. It's a great way of life.
It certainly is, and certainly exciting. And I've been watching. We all have. It's fantastic. I'm sure everyone already follows JJ on Twitter, but if you don't, you should. At Late Round QB is one of the best there is in the industry. We go back to the FanDuel days together. We were around those same offices back in the day, many, many moons ago. Yeah. And no, I didn't have hair then either. Matthew Friedman, I see here, I got a Slack message. Please see me in HR after the show. I'm not sure what that's about. But anyway, it's good to see you again 2 days in a row. We had the Julio news yesterday. We had the live draft with our users yesterday. And today it's about high-risk picks. And my friend, you were very risky in yesterday's draft, I felt like. It was all boom or bust for you.
Yeah, I mean, no risk it, no biscuit. Every day is a risk. I mean, I just took a risk spraying some of one of the early bottles of JJ's fragrance, spraying that on my body. I don't know if it's FDA approved, probably isn't, but it smells like the beach. Nice Seinfeld rip off there. It smells pretty good. We'll see if I have a rash in 30 minutes.
It smells like Baker Mayfield sitting on the bench. That's what it smells like. But yeah, if they get a rash halfway through the show, we can always stop and you can figure out some way to help you. And look, this is all about draft prep. That's where we're at here at Fantasy Pros, and it is time to start getting going on that. There's some people that never stop, and if you're one of those people that don't ever stop or is just starting up, our fantasy football draft kit is available right now at fantasypros.com/kit. We've got the rankings from all the analysts, the ADP, the player profiles, the position primers, the draft guides, the strategy. It's all there for you to prepare and get ready, and it's free. Now, if you're a premium subscriber to Fantasy Pros, obviously what happens is you get more access to more of the draft kit, but we got you covered even if you're just going for free. But I've got a game plan for you, folks, and I keep laying this out here every single show because I think it's important that you see the bigger picture. Right now, if you go to fantasypros.com/offers and you go ahead and make a deposit, you go play some DFS, you go, make a few wagers on the NFL season, whatever you like to do, and chances are you and I both know you're doing that anyway, so you might as well get some free stuff. We are going to give you, by just making a deposit into one of our partner sites, 12. That's an absolute year. When you think about it, it's a year free in our premium package here at Fantasy Pros. That means you get access to all the draft guide. You get all the draft kit pluses. You get access to our Discord channels, our AMAs, our stages. You get all of our draft tools included. So it's just incredible for, a few bucks, which you can get in terms of the value. So if you go to fantasypros.com/offers today, go check them out, find out which is the best fit for you. And then you can go ahead and get 12 free months of our premium product. And it's not just about the draft prep. It's about the draft software we have. It's about access to some really exciting tools that we've got coming out in about a week or so too, about draft intelligence. You're not going to want to miss that. And also the in-season tools here at Fantasy Pros, because we're talking about the stuff to help you manage your teams in my playbook. If you've got 2 leagues on Yahoo, 3 leagues on ESPN, and 12 leagues on Sleeper, you can set all your lineups from one spot. And I know this is what JJ uses all the time because he's got 5,000 teams as well. And you could set them all right there. You can look at all the waiver wires. You can make your life easier at Fantasy Pros. So again, fantasypros.com/offers. That's the game plan. Go do that. Sign up today in one of our partner sites, and then go over to fantasypros.com/kit to check out the draft kit. Now it's time to check out some names and talk some football now that the business is out of the way, and I hope you're in for the game plan. So today, we're going to go round by round. I asked these two gentlemen, and I use that term loosely, to pick a player from each round that they thought was a risky pick for one reason or another. And we're going to be using the half PPR situation here today. So if you want to check that out, go to fantasypros.com and go check out all of the ranks and the ECR. And today we're going to start with our guest. So give me somebody in round one, JJ, that you think is risky and whether or not you want to make that risk in 2022.
Yeah, I'll kick things off with Derrick Henry. I think this is kind of an obvious one. You know, coming off the injury, we haven't seen him do what he did a couple of years ago. I mean, he was a beast last year, obviously, to start the season. But he's now 28 years old. You know, eventually, Derrick Henry won't be breaking math, year over year. But last year actually was the first year of his career where his teammates saw a higher yards per carry average than he did. Maybe we're seeing a little bit of a dip in effectiveness and inefficiency from Henry. But the other piece to that is that the Titans offensive line is not what it was, a couple years ago or a few years ago. It's a little bit worse. PFF has it ranked 27th in football entering the season. We know that Henry's not, he's probably a decent enough pass catcher, but we know they don't utilize him that way, and that limits his ceiling in some way. I know that we haven't seen his ceiling limited as a result of that, but just in general, we know that players who don't see volume through the air generally don't have as high of ceilings. But I do think, though, that just given the situation overall in this Tennessee offense, you have new pass catchers there that, again, could be favorable. Treylon Burks could really pan out, and Robert Woods could recover from that ACL and be fine. And maybe Kyle Phillips, one of my guys, ends up doing really, really well in the slot there. But there's just a lot of ambiguity. There's a lot up in the air, and that's what makes Derrick Henry a riskier pick this season. I still think that he's okay to draft in the first round. I still have that valuation on him. I would just rather, I'm opting to go the Dalvin Cook route over Derrick Henry this year. But I do think Henry is still sort of in that middle of the first, maybe later first range. I just, I do think that there's a lot of risk involved in getting him, though.
You make a good point, too. I think we all get hyper-focused about the injury of Derrick Henry, the age of Derrick Henry, all of the peripherals. But the offensive line is something to talk about because Taylor Lewan, to me, looked like he had lost a step last year.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that's something, maybe it was an injury, maybe he was just trying to play through something, or maybe this is a player who's starting to age a little bit past that. But Derrick Henry is certainly a risky pick, that's for sure. Let's go over to your first round selection here. Tell me, Matthew Friedman, who is a risky pick to you in the first round?
I'm looking at Davante Adams in our Fantasy Pros ADP. He's going off the board number 11. I have him ranked number 16. He gets a clear downgrade at quarterback. Derek Carr is not Aaron Rodgers. I feel like that's stupid to say, but yet at the same time, it feels like it needs to be said this offseason because people are just seemingly hyping up Derek Carr, given the targets around him and the new play caller he has. And I get it, but this is still a clear downgrade situation for Davante Adams. And he has more target competition than he's ever had as a number one receiver. He played with Derek Carr in college. That's great. # shower narrative, but he doesn't have a recent rapport with Derek Carr, at least not to the extent that Hunter Renfrow and Darren Waller do. Adams might not be used across the formation the way that he was in Green Bay. The offense likely won't be as good as the Packers offense was last year. So fewer touchdown opportunities. And head coach Josh McDaniels, I don't want to disparage him, but he has had mixed results without Tom Brady and outside of New England. So McDaniels is probably good. The Raiders will probably have a good offense, but I don't think it's a certainty that they will have a good offense or a great offense. And so all of the unknowns, the uncertainty surrounding Davante Adams, I think that makes him a risky pick in round one. It has nothing to do with his talent. It's just the circumstances. I think he should go more in the middle of round two. I think his floor is a high-end wide receiver too. I would take Stephon Diggs ahead of him, and he's going right after him at ADP 12 at Fantasy Pros. I prefer Diggs to Adams.
You think Adams right now is a high end 2? He's not even a 1?
I think the floor. I think that's his floor as a high end wide receiver.
All right. Well, if he was with Aaron Rodgers there in the Packers, where would you have him ranked theoretically?
I mean, easily top 3.
Okay. Top 3 wide receivers. And then in terms of first round capital, would you be willing to make a pick number 6, 7, 8 with Davante Adams? Okay.
Yes.
Because that's typically where I would take him. And I did take him last year, many spots there. So you don't think you're getting enough of a discount basically on Adams is the point you're making?
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay. So I think discounted, but not enough for Friedman's taste.
Yeah.
All right. Very good. So that has Davante Adams right now. He is the the wide receiver 11 on the board here and 16. Again, let's just very different in terms of value and in terms of what we're looking at. I still have Davante Adams as the clear number 4 guy for me. I like him after those top 3 guys. I'm very excited about Adams. And Friedman brings up a lot of good points, which is, yes, Derek Carr is not Aaron Rodgers. That's a huge point that does bear repeating. But I still think there's the opportunity to potentially give you a big fantasy return. And I actually think you're getting enough of a discount on him to take him there. Let's move on to the second round. And this is fun because we've got a player here that you guys actually agree is risky. Now, my concern or question is whether or not you still want to take this guy anyway. So Friedman, let's start with you on this one. In round 2, give me your take on the player that you think is a risky selection.
Yes, Javonte Williams. He's going number 16 overall in FantasyPros ADP. I have him ranked 26. If not for Melvin Gordon, I'd have Williams in round 1, right? But the veteran is still there, and he's still a productive player. 1,200 yards and 11 touchdowns per year over the past half decade. 1,100 yards, 10 touchdowns per year over the past 2 seasons for Melvin Gordon. So that production isn't just going to disappear entirely. We should assume that Williams will play ahead as the lead back. But Gordon is still, he's going to have upside for 200 carries, maybe 40 targets, even if Williams stays healthy the entire season. And with Russell Wilson at quarterback, the Broncos might have more of a pass-heavy offense, so Williams might not have the usage that people expect, regardless of Gordon. I think he should go in round 3 instead of round 2. He has a decent floor, but his ceiling is capped. I prefer Aaron Jones or Saquon Barkley as 2 guys going in that range, but after Javonte Williams.
It's interesting you put Aaron Jones into that mix too, because Barkley's got the backfield to himself. Jones probably doesn't. What we saw out of A.J. Dillon last year. Why Jones, yes, and Javonte Williams, no?
Because Jones, I think with the Packers is going to be in more of a run-focused situation compared to what the offense did last year. And I think without Davante, and then without Marquez Valdes-Scantling, 200-something targets are freed up. And some of those, I think, get reallocated to Jones as the running back.
All right. Now, Javonte Williams is RB10 in the ECR right now. And this is also the player you selected, JJ. So talk to me about where you have Javonte Williams ranked, because obviously Friedman, not a fan at 26, I believe. Is that correct? Am I seeing that correct? But these old eyes really trying to tell the story here. But where do you have him ranked, and what do you see in terms of risk versus reward?
I have him in the exact same spot. I have him in 26 overall. He's my RB 14 right now. That's sort of pending what goes on with the Alvin Kamara situation, if there is a suspension there or whatnot. But I agree with him. I would take Aaron Jones over Javonte. I would take Saquon Barkley over Javonte. And look, I'm not even saying that there's not a bull case for Javonte Williams to take over this backfield and sort of be the guy. Melvin Gordon signed late. Going back to Denver. It's not like this like massively lucrative long-term deal or anything for an older back. And there's a lot of research that I've done when it comes to middle round running backs, which is where Melvin Gordon's now going, where middle round older running backs, so guys who are past their 5th year in the league, they generally never break out or exceed expectation, ADP expectation by a large number of points. And so that's good news for someone like Javonte, because obviously there's like a yin and yang here. But even still, Melvin Gordon's going to see work in this backfield in some way, shape, or form. I was actually kind of shocked to see where Javonte's ADP was on this list, because there's just a lot of good second-round running back talent overall that have a lot of upside. I mean, Saquon Barkley, no one would be shocked if he's a top 5 running back this year in fantasy. Aaron Jones, as Friedman alluded to, no Davante Adams, and his splits without Davante Adams have been otherworldly, in the past. It's a small sample size, but I do think Aaron Jones could see a 15, 16, maybe even 17% target share in that offense. And they might line him up out wide more frequently. He's a really, really good pass catching running back. And so there's just a lot of good going on around Javonte Williams there. I love Williams, the talent. He was in my prospect model, despite having worse draft capital, right there with Najee Harris and Travis Etienne in that draft class. So I love Javonte Williams, the talent. I just am not feeling totally certain that he's just going to own this backfield. And I think if you're going to spend an early second round price tag on him, then you kind of need that. You would ideally want that. And so I think he's more of an early 3rd round pick as opposed to an early 2nd round one.
Would you take him there in the 3rd round if he was there?
Yeah. I mean, I've taken him throughout the offseason best ball drafts and stuff like that, because I do think the upside still exists. Not only that, but like Melvin Gordon could get injured or something. And then
that was my next question too.
Yeah.
Friedman alluded to, if Gordon wasn't a factor, he would have him much higher. And so did I before Gordon signed. I had him as a top 5 potential player. Did you see that sort of upside for Williams as well?
100%. I mean, he was a really, really, really good prospect, and he was a really good prospect with another NFL talent in his backfield in college, and Michael Carter. And when you have the numbers that he posted, despite that, it's just really, really impressive. And then he did what he did last season, especially that game against Kansas City, looked amazing. And so I think Javonte as a talent is unbelievable. But, there's just a lot of question marks around that situation. And when you're spending that kind of capital to get that player, you need a clear path to that ceiling and not an injury to happen in order to hit that ceiling.
Very well. All right, let's continue on here. After Javonte Williams, let's go to round three. JJ, stick with another player here. You've got another running back potentially that you think is a very risky pick. Who would that be?
Yeah, look, I was surprised that Antonio Gibson was in the 3rd round by ADP as well. Just as surprised as I was with Javonte Williams where he was going. Look, I'm an Antonio Gibson guy in terms of how I view him as a talent. He comes out of school as this pass catcher. He played wide receiver in college, but he was this freak athlete. He had an unbelievable weight-adjusted 40 time, but he hasn't been able to stay healthy. And then you look at what Washington did in the draft, and on day 2, they get Brian Robinson, who I don't see Robinson as good of a player as Antonio Gibson is, even what we've seen from Gibson in the NFL. But Robinson's at least a really solid back. He was a 3-down back. He can play all 3 downs at least. And, obviously he stayed in college for a really long time, but that was partially because he was playing behind some studs, at Alabama. So I do think that we should be concerned about the reports of Robinson sort of digging into this workload of Antonio Gibson, maybe being the short yardage guy, maybe being the goal line guy. A totally separate reporter said that Gibson's touches should remain high, but his touches could vary weekly. Ron Rivera has comped this backfield to Jonathan Stewart and D'Angelo Williams, which is the backfield that he coached, back in the early 2010s-ish down in Carolina. Gibson last year was 5th in the NFL in rush share. I just don't think that that's going to be able to be maintained with Brian Robinson back there. And then, oh, by the way, J.D. McKissick is there also. J.D. McKissick sees a large target share out of that backfield. Gibson, despite having this pass catching background, we all thought that Gibson would be primarily a receiving threat out of the backfield entering the NFL. And then it's kind of been the opposite. He hasn't hit a double-digit percentage target share yet in the NFL. So to me, it feels like a committee situation, for Washington. I don't mind getting Gibson if he slips, but he's slipped in other drafts that I've been in way, way further than this 3rd round. And I would much, much rather be getting some of the wide receivers in this range. I mean, the fact that Michael Pittman is going way, way past Antonio Gibson by ADP here, give me Michael Pittman over Gibson all day long, despite the fact that I do like Gibson as a talent. I just don't love this situation at all.
He's going right now as RB19 over at FantasyPros. Actually, it's funny you mentioned that because yesterday, if memory serves, you took Antonio Gibson. Did you not, Matthew Friedman? I want to say it was the 4th round, potentially. So is that enough slippage where you have to, this was our price enforced conversation, I believe, where you have to take the value that's on the board when it's on the board. So despite all those negatives, is that the range where you say, yeah, you know what, the pluses are enough to take the plunge, Friedman?
I took him in the 5th round.
Pardon me. I think
it's pretty good value. I mean, I have an article at FantasyPros on guys I never want to draft again, and Antonio Gibson is on that list. The thing is, if he falls, far enough, yeah, I will draft him. And in the 5th round, yeah, I think for all of the reasons that JJ outlined about the things that are good with Antonio Gibson in the 5th round, yeah, I think he offers value. In the 3rd round, I agree with JJ. I'm not touching him there.
All right, so there you go. Everyone has a price, just like the $1 Million Man said, and that price was the 5th round for Friedman yesterday. All right, Matt, let's go to you. Let's go to your 3rd round selection. Who do you think is a risky draft pick that people should consider risky?
Ezekiel Elliott. He's number 31 in FantasyPros ADP. I have him ranked 42. He's had back-to-back subpar years. For him. He'll be 27 years old when the season starts. Tony Pollard is an elite handcuff who will continue to see regular action in a change of pace role. And he could see more usage even in the receiving game now that Amari Cooper isn't there. Cedric Wilson is gone. So there is a significant threat to Ezekiel Elliott. 2016 was a long time ago. I mean, I'm just going to say, like, Ezekiel Elliott, you might look at him and think that he's a guy who has a lower ceiling, but still a significantly high floor. I think low floors are sometimes harder to see than low ceilings, but a lack of upside can be a sign of hidden downside. And I think that's the case with Zeke. Like, he looks like a high floor guy. It's easy to assume that he's going to get his 250 to 300 touches. Maybe you think he'll be somewhat inefficient, but you don't care because volume trumps everything and he's going to get the goal line touches. And I understand that to a degree, but man, there's just something that's the projection that doesn't take into account randomness, right? Mm-hmm. And with older, more inefficient players, randomness is likelier to strike. And what makes Zeke so risky is that he has a very limited ceiling at his ADP with, I think, a floor that is much more unstable than people think it is. So I get taking him in round 4. I think he's a value-seeking option in round 4, but not in round 3. In round 3, I would prefer James Conner, maybe even Breece Hall.
Is the risk compounded because he's a player that's very established in our fantasy community that people have won championships with? He plays on a very public team, the Cowboys, with a lot of fandom out there. Does that make it even more complicated when it comes to Zeke because people have a hard time letting go of some of those things?
Maybe. I mean, it's easy to assume that a healthy Zeke just gets a certain level of production because we've been accustomed to that for the past half decade. But it's not anything that I think we should project forward with certainty.
All right, very good. Let's move on to round 4 here with the boys and talk about a risky draft pick. Friedman, we'll stay with you for round 4. Give me the guy that you think has you a little concerned in terms of the value.
All right, I'm looking at Justin Herbert. He has an ADP of 37 at FantasyPros. I have him ranked 50. This is sort of like a meta conversation. It's not so much that I dislike Herbert, but I'm highlighting him to make a point about early quarterbacks. And I guess it makes sense to do this with JJ on the show. First of all, I don't think you should be taking a quarterback this early in the draft. You can find guys who are good way later. Second, if you want to take a quarterback early, it doesn't need to be Herbert, who is in the middle of this tier of top quarterbacks. I don't think there's much difference between Herbert and we'll say the 3 or 4 quarterbacks after him, all of whom are significantly cheaper. And then third, I think some of the quarterbacks going after Herbert should be going ahead of him. If you take Herbert in round 4, you're taking on risk by paying more for a quarterback than you need to, and that gives you less margin for error. Like, Herbert is fine as a top 6 quarterback, but you probably don't need a top 6 quarterback in ADP, and you don't need to pay a top 3 price for that production. So I prefer Lamar Jackson, Kyler Murray, Jalen Hurts, and best of all, I prefer Trey Lance at his ADP and just avoid this tier altogether.
Yeah, something tells me that Trey Lance ADP is going to be a little bit higher in the next couple of weeks. Just a gut instinct as we all talk ourselves into that a little bit more each time. He is QB3 right now, Justin Herbert. Here's a question for you. If you're in a 14-team league, does your tune change at all about the strategy that you're laying out?
No, I'm still shooting for Trey Lance. And if someone takes him, then I'm just going to Justin Fields.
Okay, just wanted to check. I dare not ask Mr. Late Round QB how he feels. I'm pretty sure I know the answer to this. So we'll just skip that and we'll go right to his pick in round 4. If you want to chime in, JJ, of course, the floor is yours. Do you want to say anything more to the don't take a QB early? I mean, it is kind of the brand after all.
Look, music to my ears, Friedman. Music to my ears. I love hearing the Trey Lance hype, and I agree too that if you do miss out on Lance, to go for Justin Fields, go for that dual threat upside. That's the way you should be approaching the position.
But here's the thing: like, we get in these drafts, like, if you we're all in a draft together, right? We all see the same thing. But if that's all of our strategy, then what happens is sometimes these elite quarterbacks slip a little bit further than they should if everyone's super disciplined. Is there a certain point in time where that becomes a little bit of a value? Like, oh my God, Lamar Jackson's in the 7th round now. Maybe I should go and take Lamar Jackson. You see what I'm saying? Like, At what point do you break from the late round QB strategy? Because if you're in a room with people who are super disciplined, who all see the board the same way, then it's actually a little harder to execute what you're talking about.
Yeah, look, I've said this throughout the last decade that I've been doing this since I launched the late round quarterback ebook. It's that this isn't a game of chicken. You're not just waiting to be the last person to draft a quarterback. It's a game of value, and it's just that traditionally quarterbacks have gone so much later in drafts because of the supply and demand of the position, the fact that you're only starting one of them. There are viable options late as a result of that. And we see that every single year by ADP. It's changed a little bit over the last couple of years because people are finally valuing mobility the way they should be valuing it. But that QB 9 to QB 12 range, and even a little bit beyond this year, I think, because where Trey Lance is going in some drafts, that range has been still very, very lucrative for people and fruitful over the last couple of years. You've had Josh Allen there during his big breakout. Aaron Rodgers and Tom Brady have been drafted there, in their big seasons over the last couple of years. So you can still wait at the position and not feel so forced, to get a player like Josh Allen or Justin Herbert in this case. Not only that, we need to see more out of Justin Herbert's rushing to feel good about like that true QB1 ceiling in fantasy football. I think that he might be capable of that. He just hasn't used that. He doesn't necessarily need to because the weapons that they have there. But, that's another thing with Herbert is that, of the other guys going around him, as Friedman alluded to, those guys are much more mobile, at least statistically, than Herbert is.
Well, if you make good decisions and get rid of the ball quickly, you don't have to run that much. Right. Let's go to your selection here in round 4, JJ. Who's the risky pick for you?
Yeah, honestly, it's sort of like the same evidence and the same logic as Antonio Gibson that I talked about before, but it's Josh Jacobs this time. Jacobs actually had a pretty underrated 2021. I feel like people aren't really talking about like the fact that he was finally used a little bit more as a receiver. He had a double-digit percentage target share for the first time in his career last year. He was actually 9th among running backs in total targets. But it does sound like, again, Josh McDaniels and this coaching staff is going to want some sort of a committee. That's what's being reported right now, which makes sense just given the history of what we've seen with McDaniels in New England and such. But Jacobs, he was 6th in rush share last season. I think that's going to end up dropping. And also the other thing with Jacobs, this is why I think he's more of just a risky pick in general, where it could go in either direction, is that this is the last year of his rookie deal. They didn't re-up him for that 5th-year option. And so what we're staring at and what we're looking at is a new coaching staff where maybe they want to just give him a ton of work because he's going to be gone after this year, or maybe they want to start to hand off that backfield, no pun intended, to someone else, like a Zamir White, who they drafted, or they've also brought in some pass catching specialists, which doesn't bode well for Josh Jacobs' receiving upside either. So I just think there's a lot going in either direction, really, for Jacobs. I tend to lean avoiding him more than drafting him, especially in this range, because right now he's going ahead, and this is another player who I would take Michael Pittman over, and Terry McLaurin even I would take over someone like Jacobs. So that's the main reason why I see him risky, and one of the main reasons why I'm just avoiding him.
Friedman nodding his head in approval of your Terry McLaurin selection over Jacobs. And you're right, it is very difficult with Zamir White there, who's one of my favorite late round picks there, just as speculation. It could be turning the page over there in Las Vegas at the running back position. So those are the guys in rounds 1 through 4. So those are some big names, talking about Derrick Henry, Davante Adams, Javonte Williams, Gibson, Zeke, Herbert, Josh Jacobs, all certainly have some risk and for different reasons. Let's switch gears. We're going to do rounds 5 through 8 now and take a look at some of these players. And let's start with you, JJ, here again. Give me your guy in round 5 that you think is a high-risk pick still, despite the fact we're getting a little bit later into the draft.
Yeah, I'm going to go with another running back. It seems like it's a little bit easier to go running back than wide receiver with these risky picks, because we know there's only one running back on the field. So it's very easy to sort of play both sides. But Clyde Edwards-Helaire is someone who I think is risky. I don't necessarily think he's someone that you absolutely need to avoid, but I do think he's quite risky given what we've seen over the first 2 years of his career. I think the number one thing with CEH is that he just generally lacks explosion. Last season, he didn't have a single rush over 20 yards, which was the worst in the league because he didn't have any of them. The year before that, he still wasn't very good within that statistic. He was good at gaining positive yards per rush, which is sort of surprising just given his frame and his build. But again, he's playing behind a pretty good offensive line in a really good offense led by one of the best quarterbacks in the league. So it's going to open some holes, for that rushing attack. He just hasn't shown off what we thought that he might be able to show off in the NFL, and that's his pass catching ability. Every single market share number within, his profile dropped last year. Maybe it had to do with his gallbladder. I think like at the end of the day, like that's sort of what you got to like hang your hat on if you're going to be like optimistically drafting Clyde Edwards-Helaire this year. But I do think that just given what he's done so far, that lack of explosion, it makes a lot of sense. If you look at what Kansas City has done through free agency and through the draft, they're getting guys who are explosive. They got Ronald Jones, who's very, say what you want about him as a pass catcher, but he at least has that explosion on the ground. And then they drafted Isaiah Pacheco in the 7th round. And Pacheco's someone, he had the best weight adjusted 40 time in this entire class, better than Breece Hall even. So he's an athlete, and he can, he'll be able to create those plays as well, as long as he ends up making the team. And then they re-signed Jerick McKinnon, another great athlete. And don't forget, McKinnon took a lot of that receiving work as well in those big games for them last year. So I just think there's a lot of downside and risk with CEH, but obviously, if he does become the guy, and if he does finally live up to that first round expectation, which is probably doubtful, but if that does happen, then you have someone that would be very, very viable in fantasy football. And so I do see both sides, but I still lean in this range, like where he's going with this ADP. Right. It's kind of tough to take him in the 5th round.
For those people who have him in keeper situations, right, and maybe have held on to him in Dynasty or what have you, is this kind of the fork in the road for him? Well, there's a lot more opportunity now to catch the football. There's a lot more opportunity to be that guy. Is this kind of put up or shut up time in a lot of people's minds for him?
I think it has to be, right? I mean, if he loses work again to a Jerick McKinnon who's getting signed off the street, I mean, if he loses it to Isaiah Pacheco, who no one really cared about entering the draft.
Forget about Derek Gore, Andrew Erickson's favorite guy.
Yeah, right. I mean, like I was into Isaiah Pacheco as just like a random dart sort of in rookie drafts and such. And he hit some interesting marks within my model. Like he had a really good touchdown share. And
I like him too.
Combine that with his,
I thought his combine was very good too.
Yeah. And combine his touchdown share marks with his weight adjusted 40 time. Not a lot of running backs have done what he's done from within those two metrics. And he's at least intriguing, but even still, if CEH loses work to him, to a 7th rounder, I mean, it's probably the end of the road for CEH as being anything. That's why I say, like, I think the only way that you can feel like good about CEH or drafting CEH this year is if you really buy in to the gallbladder thing. And you really think that like that completely derailed, his entire 2021 season, which is possible. I mean, he said he was like 160 pounds or something after all that went down. And I'm not doubting that. And maybe it did, but I'm just saying like, it's tough to buy into those kinds of narratives when we don't really see those things.
All right. Well, hopefully the cataracts don't become an issue too, and some other things that I mean, of all the injuries too. That's not one we really hear of very much. But Pacheco's an interesting prospect too. I think I got to see him. He plays about 15 minutes from my house last year, so it was a fun player to watch. All right, Matthew Friedman, let's go switch gears over to your 5th round guy. Who is a risky selection in your mind?
Well, I feel like I'm cheating, but it's Chris Godwin. He's got the ADP of 60. I have him ranked 121, which I mean, I don't know. Maybe I'm a pessimist here. But
see, I'm actually more of a pessimist with you, so I'm fascinated to hear why you are such a pessimist on him, because I know what my reasons are.
Well, obviously the Julio Jones signing doesn't help, but even before that, Godwin's ADP was too high. He's been cleared for training camp. That's great, but that's no guarantee that he's going to be ready for week 1. We shouldn't expect him to be as efficient this year after the ACL tear, which he suffered in December. In round 5, a lack of upside basically equals downside. And, I'll just say, like, if you're not drafting to win, you're drafting to lose. I feel like Ricky Bobby would say something like that. But I don't see the upside this year with Godwin because of the injury and the increased target competition with Julio Jones as well as Russell Gage. I mean, I think Godwin, obviously the talent of a high-end wide receiver too, but this year, because of circumstances, I think he's got the floor of like a wide receiver 5 if everything goes wrong for him. I prefer Brandon Cooks, Michael Thomas. I prefer those guys in this range.
All right. Do you think that Godwin might be one of these players we look back on in a few years, like Akeem Nicks or something like that? The guys who had like 2 really good years and then somehow just faded, things didn't work out. Do you think like he's more set up for that sort of a career, or do you think Godwin still has enough time to, still recapture some of that magic he had? Because this guy was a wide receiver 1 just a couple years ago.
Yeah, I mean, he's still young. The ACL injury, I mean, I think it should impact him a little bit in terms of efficiency for year 1. In year 2, he should probably be fine. We've seen someone like Allen Robinson recover from an ACL injury and have multiple seasons of good production after that. I'm not too worried about Godwin in the long term. It's more of a short-term thing this year because of the recovery for the injury and the timetable there. And then the circumstances of Mike Evans, Julio Jones, and Russell Gage. It's a lot of target competition.
That's fair. All right. Now, speaking of Allen Robinson, speak of the devil, round 6 is up. And I know you've been itching to get on this. So here you go. Here's your risky draft pick for round 6. Matthew Friedman, the floor is yours.
Yeah, just clear some space. I'm gonna rant.
This is like this is like at the wedding when everyone's like, "All right, everybody, step back. Friedman's gonna do the robot. It's gonna be awesome. Everybody, hang in. Let's go."
And I know that JJ, I think, has a more main like. I'm trying to think of the right word that doesn't make it sound like I'm insulting JJ's take on this, but
it's
like
fine.
more,
it's fine. Just
more of a consensus.
Well, this is the only time we haven't booked this month, so it's okay.
Okay. JJ has more of like a mainstream, more consensus, more maybe reasonable take on Allen Robinson than I do. But here we go. Okay, he's got, I think, a rather unnice ADP of 69 in our Fantasy Pros consensus. I have him ranked 88. I've been really vocal about my distrust for Allen Robinson. His second season was fantastic. 1,400 yards, 14 touchdowns. Maybe, if not the best second season we've seen out of a 22-year-old receiver, one of the top seasons. It was also 7 years ago. And since then, he's been more of an accumulator than a playmaker. And last year, the accumulation stopped. 410 yards, 1 touchdown, 66 targets in 12 games. 12 games for a guy who is conceivably a good wide receiver to have only that kind of production. It's mind-blowing. Like his 2021 season, it's like the joke about 2 women at a Catskills resort talking about the food. One woman says, "This food is really bad." And the other one says, "I know, in such small portions." Like Allen Robinson had almost no targets last year. And then when he did almost nothing with them. When that happens with a wide receiver who is getting older, we should be very skeptical. And Robinson's age, I think, should be a legitimate concern, especially for a guy with an ACL injury in his past and a guy who wins with physicality more than technique. Like he is right on the cusp of when we could reasonably attribute a decline in efficiency to age instead of randomness or like quarterback play or coaching incompetence, or lack of motivation, or whatever random excuse people always come up with to explain away the declining production of the aging players that they like. Like, that's what it sounds like. Let's just Occam's razor this thing. Allen Robinson played badly last year because there's a very real chance that he is no longer the player that he used to be. People are acting as if the fact that the Rams gave Robinson a lucrative multi-year contract actually means something, as if football teams always make rational decisions when they are in a championship window. Okay, the Rams are a great organization, but they just drafted Tutu Atwell in the 2nd round last year. Like, people aren't still talking about that investment in a wide receiver. A year from now, this contract could look horrible with Allen Robinson. And people just assume that Robinson is automatically going to get 120 plus targets. That's what people assumed last year. And Robinson, I think, has a really hard cap on his target volume because he plays behind Cooper Kupp. And he's averaged just 7.7 yards per target since his 2017 ACL tear. I don't need to go down the list of guys who are good wide receivers who have more than 7.7 yards per target over the past 5 years, but it's a long list. It's not a short list. And I will just say, even with 120 targets, I doubt that Allen Robinson is going to be as efficient as a yardage accumulator as people think. And I think his touchdown potential is being overstated, given that quarterback Matthew Stafford has an established connection with Cooper Kupp and that the Rams offense is likely to regress in his total number of passing touchdowns. Mike Clay of ESPN has Robinson projected for 920 yards and 6 touchdowns. We have him projected internally for 937 and 6.5. I think we're high on him. At DraftKings, his receiving prop is 825.5. I am very skeptical of his upside. If he outperforms ADP, I think he barely does it. And if he underperforms ADP, he could be a total disaster. He has the floor of a wide receiver 5. I would rather have Amon-Ra St. Brown, Gabriel Davis. Name almost any other second-year wide receiver. I would rather have that guy than Allen Robinson. JJ, take it away.
Let me ask you, are you high on Van Jefferson then?
No, I'm not high on Van Jefferson.
He hates everything equally. That was something, boy. That felt like therapy for. Do you feel okay now? Do you feel like lighter now for you after that?
I always feel the same amount of displeasure, no matter what it is that I say.
That's what I love about you. It's a consistent disdain that just levels the entire time. I really love. Well, look, I hate this, JJ, because I actually agree with a lot of what Friedman said. I find him to be a little bit of a hypocrite because yesterday he told me how good Julio Jones was and then drafted him about all the age and decline and all that stuff.
No.
Hold on. Yeah, I know you got your glasses on and they're all rosy colored when it comes to Julio Jones, but I want to talk to JJ now for a second because, I want to give him a chance to talk me out of this funk that I am in. And now you have sunk me down even further into the funk of Allen Robinson. I was already you and I are probably the lowest two people, I think, in all fantasy on him. JJ, speak to the difference, and then I'll let Friedman get the last word on Allen Robinson, I hope.
Yeah. So here's the thing. I'll say this about Robinson's 2021, which, yes, was not great. Not at least what we would want or expect out of Allen Robinson in that name. But if you look at like PFF grades, he was around where like Marquise Brown was graded, pretty close to Jerry Jeudy, which doesn't necessarily say much because Jeudy was hobbled last year. Matt Harmon's reception perception actually was way more favorable for Allen Robinson than expected as well. So maybe he wasn't as bad as his numbers showed, and there was a reason for why his numbers looked the way that they did. And then we look at this situation, of course, wide receivers, like I know that Friedman agrees with me when I say that wide receivers can create their own destiny, if you will, statistically, and their ability to be efficient and such, and targets are earned because they're getting open, and that's why they're getting targeted. But I do think that there is still something to be said about Allen Robinson and the quarterback play that he's had throughout his career, which has been, dating back to high school, right? I mean, the guy had Christian Hackenberg in college. He's had literally nothing throughout the NFL as well. And he's finally paired with Matthew Stafford, who, yes, I'll get to him in a second, but yes, is a huge regression candidate in this offense, will likely regress in the passing touchdown column. But LA in this offense, this McVay offense, they run a ton of 11 personnel. They've been top 10. Their worst season since McVay has gotten there in wide receiver target share has been 63%, which is a top 10 number in 2021 if you were to use that worst season in terms of wide receiver target share. And then on top of that, the team's wide receiver two, whoever that wide receiver two ended up being in terms of adjusted target share per game, so basically prorated target share, they haven't been lower than 21% during this McVay era. I understand Robert Woods is a great wide receiver, and some of the Brandon Cooks who they've had, obviously a great wide receiver. And that obviously plays into a number like that. But again, this offense also just generally favors the wide receiver position. They run 11 personnel more than any other offense in the NFL. And so this is
finally that out of necessity last year because of all the Cam Akers injury and not really having somebody they believed in at the position. Is that more play with what you got necessarily than a philosophy?
It's definitely, I think it's a philosophy because they continuously are churning out wide receivers. Like they're getting different wide receivers in and out of that system, and they're continuously using those wide receivers. Van Jefferson has not really shown up as a talent, and he's still running a decent amount of routes in that offense because they love to run 11 personnel. And then on top of that, it's not like they have a ton of other options to not run 11 personnel given the personnel right now, right? They have some interesting depth maybe at tight end, but it just makes a lot of sense to run those three wide sets. And so, you combine all of that and you have a situational floor, at least for Allen Robinson. And yes, I am the first to say that talent needs to be the number one thing that you worry about when drafting wide receivers or especially wide receivers, but drafting players in fantasy football. But I think that there is still talent there with Allen Robinson. If you look past last season, I understand that I don't want to just like completely dismiss last season, but there is still some evidence, whether you're looking at a PFF grade or a Harmon charting, there is at least some evidence that he's not necessarily completely toast. So I'm actually higher on Allen Robinson. I think Allen Robinson's a good pick this year. I like him at this ADP. I would be snagging him. I know that I'm on an island on this podcast and saying that, but let's go.
That's okay.
Rob. Bounce back.
Well, look, we hope you've enjoyed the Allen Robinson show. We'll be back again tomorrow to do it again. Let's get to another player not named Allen Robinson. Let's get to your 6th round pick. Who is the risky guy in your opinion in that round?
Yeah, so risky. I think is obviously going to like Michael Thomas. I don't think he's a bad pick though.
That's true. And let's be clear about that. We're trying to say risk doesn't mean I'm not taking them in the right place. This is just about identifying these players and how much risk you want to take on.
Yeah. So if we just assume the upside, I mean, we've seen the upside, right? Like we've seen Michael Thomas command a ton of looks in his offense. He's seen multiple seasons of massively high target shares. So he's a good player. We know that. So if you just want to look at the downside, his last snap played in an NFL game was December of 2020. So there's obviously risk there. His rehab has been one of the strangest rehabs I've ever seen from any injury in NFL history. Now he has Jarvis Landry and Chris Olave. I'm really high on Chris Olave as a talent, in that offense he's competing with. Sean Payton's gone, Jameis Winston coming off that ACL. There is talk that they're going to be more pass heavy than they've been, over the last couple of seasons with that like decline of Drew Brees into last year and such, with Taysom Hill. But I do think that there's obvious risk involved with Michael Thomas, which is why I wanted to call him out. But I think the reward is there too, which is why I still think that he's a fine enough pick where he's going.
He's a guy that I have more shares of in best ball than in season long, if that makes sense. I just feel like I'll take the upside there. We'll see if we can make it work. But in the season long, I'm still a little skeptical. It's nice to see him on the field today, though. That was encouraging to watch him actually run a route. Yeah. That was nice. Very overdue, I would say. Let's go back and let's stick with JJ for a little while after the one-man show on Allen Robinson. Let's go to round 7, JJ, and talk about your guy who happens to be the quarterback of the Rams.
Yeah, I think people probably hear Matthew Stafford on this like risky show and they're like, I don't really understand why he would be a risky selection, but it sort of goes back to what we were talking about earlier and what Friedman was alluding to with the quarterback position and the opportunity cost involved in getting guys later and sort of, quarterback's one of the positions where it's easiest to sort of play to find arbitrage plays. Like to me, why draft Matthew Stafford when you can get Kirk Cousins a little bit later, where Kirk Cousins is basically going to be scoring points in a really similar way. He's got Matthew Stafford's offensive coordinator from last year now as head coach. They're going to be more pass heavy, et cetera, et cetera. But if you look at what the Rams did last year, 80% of their offensive touchdowns came via the pass. And that's a number that generally regresses a lot year over year. And despite that, Matthew Stafford was still a low-end QB1 in points per game. A lot of that has to do with the fact that he's just not a mobile quarterback. That's just he's never going to have in this era of fantasy football. It's going to be really, really difficult for a player like Stafford to have a crazy high ceiling. Now, a lot of that is due to the fact that he threw the second most pass attempts at the goal line last year, only behind Justin Herbert. So naturally, if the Rams were more pass heavy at the goal line, their touchdowns are going to skew more towards the pass. But those numbers do tend to regress year over year a little bit. I would much rather have, if you want to go the pocket passer route, I'm sure this is going to change a little bit after the Julio signing, but right now, according to the ADP, Tom Brady's going a little bit after Stafford. And then what we said earlier, I would just much, much rather have Trey Lance later. I mean, just go after Trey Lance. You're going to get a huge discount on him versus where Stafford's going according to this ADP. I just don't think Stafford's that strong of a pick this year.
Right now, we got Tom Brady going as QB9 over there on FantasyPros, Russell Wilson, then Matthew Stafford. Is it easy to frame it as just a simple saying that Stafford is maybe the most likely guy in the top 12 not to finish in the top 12 at the end of the year?
Yeah, I mean, I think that he's one of the easy candidates to go to there for sure, just because there's a lot of other players that score exactly the way that Matthew Stafford's going to score. I mean, Kirk Cousins was the obvious go-to. Derek Carr's another example of that, where now he has Davante Adams there and there are weapons there. You could even look at Tua. Tua is another more pocket passer who now has better weapons, and I don't think anyone would be shocked, if Matthew Stafford doesn't score as many points as Tua this year. I mean, there's just a lot of players, a lot of pocket passers that you can draft later than spending up on this, what I see as a premium on Stafford based on what he did last year. And last year, those numbers are pretty unrepeatable.
All right, let's move on again. Now we are in round 7. Go ahead, Matthew Friedman. Who is your risky pick?
Okay, I'm going with Hunter Henry, ADP of 79. I have
Hunter Henry or Hunter Renfrow?
I said Hunter Henry. I meant Hunter Renfrow. Good thing we have this written out in the show sheet.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, it's a good thing you have a host who pays such attention to detail. Now, I don't like the fact that you've selected Hunter Renfrow. I think that's why it's stuck in my craw so much. So go ahead. Now you can take shots on one of my favorite players here.
I mean, I can't imagine what a human being would like about Hunter Renfrow as a fantasy asset in the year 2022. A lot of what I said earlier about Davante Adams applies to Hunter Renfrow. More target competition, both overall and in the red zone, a new coaching staff. So some uncertainty about the specifics of the degree to which he will be used. The problem with Renfrow isn't really his floor. I think he's got a pretty good floor, like a safe floor as a wide receiver 4. I think his problem is ceiling, and that makes him risky because especially this late in the draft, we should be targeting upside. So I prefer someone like Juju Smith-Schuster, Devontae Smith, Kadarius Toney. Those guys probably look riskier than Hunter Renfrow in that they don't have as high of a probability of scoring like a decent number of fantasy points, but you're not trying to get a decent number of fantasy points in round 7. Like this is probably like your wide receiver 3, wide receiver 4. You're looking for a guy who has a potential to outperform his ADP in a pretty significant manner. And I just don't see that from Hunter Renfrow.
Who are the other names? I heard you say Tony. Who are the other ones that you thought were better selections?
Juju and Devontae Smith.
Okay, so Juju, who looks like toast the last 2 years, and
3 years. Yes.
3 years. Oh, 3 years. Pardon me. You're right. 3. And Kadarius Toney, who played relatively well for 2 games. Those guys you're willing to put ahead of Hunter Renfrow.
Yes, because I'm shooting for upside.
That's fine. You're also shooting, I think, your roster out behind the shed if you do that, potentially. Just saying. Let's stick with you, Friedman. Round 8, give me another name that you think is a high-risk selection.
Dawson Knox. He's going 91 in consensus ADP at FantasyPros. I have him ranked 103. Touchdown regression. Thy name is Dawson Knox. He had just 71 targets in 15 games, but he turned that into 9 touchdowns. I mean, that's totally unsustainable. For his career, he's at 7.7 yards per target. Like he needs to get more targets or be more efficient with his targets as a yardage producer if he can hope to overcome the almost certain loss of touchdowns in 2022. And I'm skeptical that's going to happen with all the other receiving options around him. So Dawson Knox, I think he has the floor of a tight end too. Like he's got a decent floor, but I'm just skeptical about his ability to be like a top 3, top 6 tight end. So especially if they're ADPs, I'd rather have Cole Kmet, Irv Smith,
yes.
Albert O. Those are the guys I'm looking at more.
I agree. I like those names that you laid out there. Okay, JJ, wrap us up here with your last selection in round 8 that you think is a high risk pick.
Yeah, I'm going to go with Rashaad Penny. I actually have 7 things as to why Rashaad Penny is incredibly risky. There's just I just started looking at his profile and I'm like, oh, there's another thing. Oh, there's
sounds like
thing.
An article. Seven reasons why Rashaad Penny is very risky.
No, not an article, a tweet thread.
Yeah,
JJ.
Oh, that's right.
As you know, I love the threads.
Articles have become, snapshots of Twitter posts, and Twitter posts have become articles. That's right. The world we live in right now. But go ahead. Give me the reasons.
Look, I understand the report about, him potentially seeing 20 plus carries per game. And maybe they want to really establish the run in such an insane way and give Kenneth Walker and Rashaad Penny 35 touches a game, which would be difficult in an environment where they're likely to see negative game scripts. But number one, Seattle's quarterback situation right now, maybe they end up getting Jimmy Garoppolo or something, but even still would be one of the worst in the league still. But it is the worst in the league right now. Number 2, Seattle's offensive line over on PFF ranks dead last in the league entering the season. Number 3, they ran at an unbelievably slow pace last year. That's probably going to regress favorably a little bit, but I mean, this is like the Pete Carroll special. I mean, there's nothing that Pete Carroll loves more than running the football and only running like 15 plays a game. I mean, if he could walk away with like a 6-3 final and barely running plays, it would be ideal. He hates offense. And then number 4, the Seahawks just drafted Kenneth Walker. There's another reason why Rashaad Penny is a little bit risky. Number 5, Rashaad Penny hasn't been able to stay healthy. Number 6, Rashaad Penny had an unbelievably unsustainable yards per carry rate last year. And then number 7, the thing that I feel like no one talks about with Penny saw 8 targets last year. Rashaad Penny had 8 targets through the air. Since 2011, there have been over 100 running backs that had 100 to 120 rushes. He had the 3rd fewest targets out of all of those players. It's not common. It's not a good ratio to have so few targets per rush attempt. So I just think I liked Penny as a prospect coming out. I loved what he did at the end of last year because it won me some fantasy championships. I just know for a fact that what he did at the end of last year is not sustainable. You have Kenneth Walker breathing down his neck. Even if they're saying they want to do this at the beginning of the season, maybe that's the case. And maybe they do feed him. It's just not a good situation, though. They can feed him and he could still not be fantasy viable because the environment's so poor. So I think Rashaad Penny, not only a risky pick, but just not a very good one either.
If you enjoy SAT analogies, Rashaad Penny is to JJ as Allen Robinson is to Matthew Friedman. There you go. That's for you. Let's wrap things up with a mailbag question from our Discord, which again is free to join. But when you're a Fantasy Pros member, you get a whole lot more access to us, including stages, including AMA channels. It's a great community of Fantasy Pros. So join the family today. This is a keeper redraft question for us. 12-team full PPR. We have 3 wide receivers, 1 flex spot. Travis Etienne in the 14th round keeper, Javonte Williams in the 5th, or Cooper Kupp in the 2nd. To me, I want to win. Give me Cooper Kupp in the 2nd. That's what I would do. But Friedman, what do you think about this question in terms of value?
I think it's Etienne, and I don't think it's really even close. Like if you had a draft right now, and if Travis Etienne fell to you in the 14th round, you would be ecstatic, right? Like,
but he's a winning. Is he going to win you your league this year?
Yes.
Even with all those other players being kept, because keep that in mind, other teams are keeping other quality players here. So you don't have the same draft pool. A first round pick is not a first round pick when everyone's keeping certain players.
Yeah, I know. But like Cooper Kupp, even if you said, okay, other players are kept, so maybe that's more like a 3rd round pick or a 4th round pick, like that's fine. There's like significant value there. But Etienne, I think actually does have like a top 8 running back ceiling. And to get someone like that in the 14th round, I mean, that is outrageous value.
It is. I love Etienne, believe me. So you don't have to sell me. I love Williams too. I love all these selections, which is why our friend here, Lav, is asking this question. So JJ, do you have an answer for Lav's question?
I think the answer is not Javonte Williams. I think we'd all agree with that.
The least of the 3, yes.
Yeah, I mean, look, I understand both arguments here. Keeper questions are always difficult because there's just a lot of context needed, obviously. Like, it'd be nice
cop out, JJ. Way to go.
Yeah, but I would still go Travis Etienne, though. So there you go, Joe. I'm going to side with Friedman there. I'll go Etienne.
All right, so I'll stand on this island by myself. This was great fun. This was like... just, exactly what you want. You want to have good debate, good discussions. There's a lot of picks here. If you've got names that you think are high risk picks or you agree or disagree with us, drop those comments in the YouTube channel. Make sure you subscribe to Fantasy Pros YouTube channel as well. We love to hear your thoughts here. Certainly, there were a lot of thoughts, feelings, and emotions about a lot of players on this show. So you have a lot to go on, and I expect you to go on it. JJ, I can't thank you enough for making the time. I know lateround.com is up and running. You've got so much going on. Please plug all the new stuff that you have before we say goodbye today.
Yeah, so I got my podcast, the Late Round Podcast, and then there's the Late Round Draft Guide. I know there's a lot of draft guides out there, but mine is not really player profile specific. It's more so me digging into more strategy stuff, basically the stuff that I've done over the last 10 years of my career. Sort of differentiate it a little bit, make you think a little bit differently about fantasy football. So that's all found over on lateround.com.
There you go. All good resources. And another good resource is our draft kit available now at fantasypros.com/kit. Again, it's free to get the draft kit, but if you want to expand your knowledge, expand the tools that you have at your disposal for your draft and in season, head over to fantasypros.com/offers. Again, you make a small deposit in one of our partner sites and you get an entire year free of all of our premium products here at Fantasy Pros. That is a deal you just shouldn't pass up if you take fantasy football seriously. And chances are, if you listen to the show, that you do. So again, go check that out at fantasypros.com/offers and find the best one for you. And then utilize all the tools, preseason, draft season, in season, to make sure that you win and dominate all your leagues. We have to dominate them. It's not enough to win. We have to dominate them. So for Matthew Friedman and JJ Zachariason, I'm Joey P. We'll see you next time, kids.
Thanks for tuning in to the Fantasy Pros YouTube channel. Don't forget to check out our featured videos. And while you're at it, make sure to follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at Fantasy Pros, so you can get the latest news and updates to give you the edge you need in your fantasy league.